She was still standing in the golden light of the chandeliered lobby when the guards moved closer, their heavy boots clicking against the marble floor, their eyes avoiding hers, as if they were ashamed of what they were about to do, yet determined to follow orders. She had built this place from the ground up. Every inch of glass, every thread of carpet, every polished piece of brass had passed through her vision, her decisions, her sacrifices, and yet, here she was, fingers gripping the handle of her leather briefcase, chest heaving with disbelief, as one guard cleared his throat and muttered softly under his breath, "Ma'am, you need to leave." And in that moment, the world tilted. The chandeliers that had once been her pride now seemed to mock her with their excessive brightness. The guests sipping wine in the bar glanced curiously and quickly looked away, whispering to each other in half-hidden voices, and she felt her skin burn with humiliation, a hot tide of betrayal rushing through her veins. Her name was Cassandra Morgan, and for the past decade she had been celebrated in magazines and business journals as the youngest black woman to own and operate a luxury hotel chain. Her face had graced covers with the caption "Self-made, visionary, a force of elegance and resilience," but right now in the lobby of her flagship property, she was nothing more than an unwanted intruder tossed aside like she was disposable, her boardroom victories forgotten, her relentless work buried beneath the smirks of men who believed they had finally broken her. The doors behind the reception desk opened, and Victor Bay, the man she had once trusted as her general manager, stepped out, his tailored suit gleaming, his smug grin as sharp as glass. He moved with a calmness that mocked her trembling body, his voice cold and rehearsed. "Cassandra, you no longer belong here. This property has been reassigned by the board, your access revoked, your leadership terminated, effective immediately." And as his words echoed against the high ceilings, she felt the ground sway beneath her feet, because she knew what this really was. It was not business, it was betrayal, personal, calculated, cruel. The culmination of whispers behind her back and deals struck in smoke-filled rooms while she was too busy fighting 1,000 other battles to notice. The guards reached for her arms gently at first, as if they feared breaking something sacred, but firm enough to make it clear she had no choice. Her heels scraped across the marble, her dignity bleeding with every reluctant step as she was dragged past the grand fountain. She had commissioned the cascading water, now sounding like cruel laughter against her ears. She kept her head high, though every muscle screamed to collapse, because she would not let them see her cry. Not Victor, not the staff who peered from the shadows, not the guests who would turn her pain into gossip outside. The night air struck her face sharp and cold, the hotel sin glowing above her like a cruel reminder of what she had lost: her empire, her sanctuary, her dream. Now a prison that had spat her out onto the wet pavement. The rain had begun to fall in thin needles, soaking her blazer, plastering her curls against her face, and she stood frozen in disbelief as the heavy golden doors slammed shut behind her, leaving her in the dark with only the echo of her heartbeat and the distant hum of the city. 9 minutes of silence, 9 minutes of standing in the storm, tasting the salt of her own rage on her lips. 9 minutes in which she replayed every sacrifice she had ever made, the nights without sleep, the holidays spent in boardrooms, the relationships she had abandoned because the hotel always came first, the hands that had applauded her in public while plotting her downfall in private. 9 minutes of fury boiling inside her chest until it transformed into something sharper, something more dangerous than despair. She could still see Victor's smirk in her mind, his dismissive tone, his certainty that she was finished, and that image became fuel. It burned away the humiliation and carved space for resolve. She was Cassandra Morgan. She had been raised in the ashes of struggle and had learned early that when the world tried to erase her, she did not vanish. She multiplied, she adapted, she fought back with precision. She had been thrown out of her own empire, but what Victor and the board did not know was that she had been preparing for betrayal ever since she saw the first crack in their loyalty. She tightened her grip on the leather briefcase, rain dripping from its polished edges. Inside were documents sealed in folders marked confidential, evidence she had gathered quietly over the past months: bank transfers, irregular contracts, anonymous testimonies, and one damning secret that could topple not just Victor but every member of the board who had conspired against her. They thought they were playing chess while she was playing survival, but Cassandra had always been 10 moves ahead. The limousine that waited at the curb was not hers, but the driver lowered the window and nodded respectfully, a shadowy ally she had placed weeks ago. When she began to suspect that the tide was shifting, she slid into the back seat, water dripping onto the leather interior, her heart Pounding not with fear but with the electrifying rush of purpose, she whispered to herself, "They will regret this," and her voice, though low, was as sharp as steel. As the car pulled away, the glowing facade of her hotel blurred in the rain, yet instead of sorrow she felt a strange exhilaration. The humiliation of being dragged out had planted something inside her, something that pulsed like fire. Every betrayal she had endured in life had always led to a rebirth, and this night would be no different. The next 9 minutes would define the war she was about to wage. The city blurred past, neon signs flickering against puddles, the hum of traffic mixing with the pounding rhythm of her pulse. She thought of her father, who had worked 3 jobs just to keep the family afloat, teaching her that dignity was not given, it was fought for. She thought of her mother, who had told her never to shrink, no matter how many times the world told her she was not enough. She thought of the little girl. She had once been dreaming of towers and chandeliers and velvet halls, promising herself that she would never beg for a seat at someone else's table, because she would build her own. And now, watching her creation stolen from her, she realized that her journey was not ending here. It was only shedding a skin. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, screen glowing with a message from an unknown number. "Cassandra, it is time," and a chill raced down her spine because she knew exactly what it meant. She had allies hidden in the shadows, investors and whistleblowers, who had waited for her signal to unleash the truth, and now the humiliation of this night had provided the perfect spark. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Eyes, steady voice, calm destination, ma'am, and Cassandra took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing, her hand tightening around the briefcase. She leaned forward and whispered, "Take me to the boardroom." The limousine surged forward, slicing through the wet streets, her reflection in the tinted glass a vision of fury and determination, and in that moment she knew this was no longer about a hotel. It was about every betrayal she had ever endured, every ceiling she had shattered only to find another above it. Every man who had underestimated her only to watch her rise again. This was war, and Cassandra Morgan had no intention of losing. The limousine moved like a dark whisper through the city streets, neon lights sliding across the wet glass, as Cassandra sat in the back, clutching her briefcase, her mind a whirlwind of betrayal, rage and calculation. Every corner they turned felt like a step deeper into the storm she had been forced into, yet also like the steady march of fate guiding her to the moment where she would reclaim not only her hotel but her very name. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but her body pulsed with fire. She refused to break, not tonight, not in front of the vultures waiting to pick her bones. As the car swayed gently, she let her head rest against the seat for just a second, breathing through the ache in her chest, remembering the moment the guards had dragged her out, the sting of humiliation that still seared her skin. But humiliation could be turned into fuel, just like every scar on her life had once been fuel. They had thought she was cornered, but they had underestimated the kind of woman who had learned to fight in silence, who had learned to build fortresses brick by brick with hands that had known struggle since childhood. The driver, a man with a sharp jaw and eyes that never lingered too long, finally spoke, his voice steady as stone. "Ma'am, we are 5 minutes away." And Cassandra nodded, her grip tightening around the briefcase as though she was holding the last piece of her soul inside it. She whispered under her breath, not for him but for herself, "They think I am done, but they do not know who they are dealing with." Her reflection in the tinted glass looked back at her like a stranger, like a warrior born from fire. Her mind replayed the faces of the board members, men and women in designer suits, smiling at her in the past, while sipping champagne at her galas, offering handshakes and hollow words of loyalty, yet secretly plotting how to cut her out of her own empire. Victor had been the ringleader, but she knew the rot went deeper. She had seen fragments of emails, coded conversations, financial trails that led to offshore accounts and partnerships with rivals. She had pieced the puzzle slowly, methodically, never fully believing they would move against her so soon, but tonight had proven that her instincts were right. Betrayal was not coming. It had already arrived. The limousine slowed in front of a towering skyscraper, its windows lit like 100 eyes staring down at her. Cassandra inhaled deeply. "First we leak enough to the press to set fire under them. We let the world turn its gaze on him before he can twist his lies into truth." Daniel hesitated, his fingers tightening around the pages. "Cassandra, once this is released, there is no turning back. Victor will not just fight in boardrooms, he will fight in shadows. He will dig into every piece of your past, your family, your history, your vulnerabilities." And Cassandra lifted her chin, eyes unflinching. "Let him dig, let him drag." The Mud if he wants, because mud only sticks if I let it. I have survived worse than scandal. Daniel nodded slowly, respect flashing in his eyes. You remind me of your mother, he whispered. She fought the same way in court, unyielding, even when the odds were against her. Cassandra's chest ached at the mention of her mother, but she pressed it down, burying grief beneath resolve. Before they could speak further, Cassandra's phone buzzed again. A single line flashing on the screen they know about. The river safe house. Her blood ran cold as she locked eyes with Daniel. Without speaking, he understood Marcus and Nyla were in danger. The safe house was supposed to be invisible. Only a handful knew its location, and if Victor's people had found it, that meant betrayal had already slithered into her circle. Cassandra's mind raced. Marcus had access to financial trails. Nyla had access to staff testimonies. If either of them had cracked under fear or temptation, everything could unravel. She stood abruptly, snapping her briefcase shut, her voice steel. I need to go now. The driver had already prepared the car. Sensing her urgency, the limousine roared through the streets, Cassandra's pulse quickening with every turn. She stared out the window, the city, a blur of glass and concrete, her reflection staring back at her like a warning. She whispered to herself, one of them has betrayed me, but which one? Her memory replayed the hours at the safe house. Marcus's cautious words, Nyla, fiery determination. Had it been hesitation or deceit? Had it been fire or performance? She clenched her jaw. The only way to know was to face them. When she arrived, the building by the river looked ordinary, yet the silence around it screamed wrong. The air carried the metallic tamps of fear. Cassandra pushed through the door, her heels echoing like gunshots. The lights inside flickered, revealing Marcus slumped over the table, papers scattered. Nyla standing rigid by the window, her silhouette sharp against the pale light. Cassandra rushed forward, shaking Marcus. His body groaned, but he stirred, alive but beaten, his lip bleeding, his voice hoarse. They found us, Cassandra. They came looking for the files. I held them off, but Nyla. Cassandra spun to the window. Nyla turned slowly, her face unreadable, her eyes colder than Cassandra had ever seen. She said nothing at first, then finally spoke, her words slicing through the silence. I told them where we work. Sandra froze, disbelief colliding with rage, her voice trembling. You betrayed me. Why? Nyla's eyes glistened with tears, but her mouth twisted with bitterness. Because Victor promised me my job back, promised me the career you let slip through my fingers when you chose others over me. You think you are the only one who has been betrayed. Cassandra, you think your pain is heavier than ours, but you are wrong. We have all bled because of you, and some of us were too tired to keep bleeding. Cassandra's heart pounded, her vision blurring with fury. She had trusted Nyla, had given her purpose after Victor cast her aside, and this was how she repaid that trust. Betrayal layered upon betrayal. Victor's poison spreading through every crack. She pressed her palms against the steel table, forcing her voice calm despite the storm inside. So you sold me out for a promise from the very man who destroyed you, Nyla, her voice rising with scorn. Victor will devour you the same way he devoured me. Nyla flinched, but her face hardened. Cassandra's words reaching her, yet colliding with the weight of desperation. Marcus groaned behind them, his voice weak but sharp. Cassandra. She gave them files, not all, but enough to know you are moving against them. Cassandra's stomach tightened. Every second counted. She stepped toward Nyla, her voice low, almost a whisper, but heavy with fire. I do not hate you for betraying me, Nyla. I pity you, because you will realize too late that men like Victor do not give back what they steal. They only take more. Nyla's lips trembled as if the truth had cut through her bitterness, but before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed outside, heavy, deliberate boots. Cassandra's instincts screamed danger. She snapped open her briefcase, pulling out the folders, clutching them to her chest. She turned to Marcus, dragging him to his feet, her voice sharp. Move. Now. The back door slammed open, shadows flooding the room, men in suits with eyes like glass, weapons hidden but obvious. Cassandra grabbed Marcus by the arm, shoving him toward the exit. Nyla stood frozen, torn between the two worlds. She had chosen one already, yet regret carved lines into her face. Cassandra did not wait to see her choice. She pushed Marcus out into the misty air, the river whispering behind them as the men stormed inside. Cassandra's heart pounded, her breath sharp, but her grip on the files unyielding. They ran through the narrow alleyways, Cassandra half carrying Marcus, her heels striking sparks against the broken pavement. The night air cut like blades, yet every breath fueled her resolve. She would not let Victor win, not like this, not after everything she had sacrificed. Marcus stumbled, but Cassandra tightened her grip, whispering fiercely, hold on. You are not falling tonight. They reached the limousine, the driver throwing the door open without question. Cassandra shoved Marcus inside, followed by herself. The door slammed and the car roared to life, tires screeching as shadows spilled into the alley, too late to catch them inside the car. Cassandra's body shook with adrenaline, her mind spinning with rage and grief. Nyla's face haunted her, not because of the betrayal, but because of the tears in her eyes, the reminder that betrayal often grows not from greed alone, but from desperation, from wounds unhealed. Victor was not just attacking her with power, he was attacking her with the broken lives of those she had once trusted. Marcus clutched his side, his voice ragged. Cassandra, he will not stop. He has eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. But Cassandra pressed a hand to his shoulder, silencing him, her voice firm, steady, almost terrifying. He thinks betrayal will break me, but he does not understand. Betrayal is the fire that forges me. The limousine sped into the city. Cassandra looked out the window, her reflection in the glass soaked with exhaustion but alive with dangerous fire. She whispered to herself, the war has begun, and it will not end until Victor and every one of his allies is ash beneath my feet. The city stretched before her like a battlefield, unseen skyscrapers glowing like watchtowers, the streets pulsing with veins of betrayal. Cassandra sat in the limousine, her clothes torn, her body aching. Marcus beside her, still bleeding but alive, his eyes closing and opening as if he were drifting between worlds. She held the briefcase tightly against her chest, her knuckles white, her heart pounding like war drums. She had lost one ally tonight to betrayal and nearly lost another to violence, yet inside the storm of exhaustion something burned brighter than fear, the unbreakable will of a woman who had been humiliated in front of strangers but who now carried in her veins the fire of reckoning. The driver glanced at her through the mirror, his voice steady but low. Ma'am, where to? And Cassandra's gaze locked on the horizon where the tallest tower pierced the clouds. Victor's headquarters, his throne of glass and greed. Her lips curved, not in a smile but in a line sharp with determination. Take me to the tower. Her voice whispered like steel. The driver hesitated just for a breath, then nodded, his jaw tight, as though he knew he was driving her straight into the lion's den. Marcus stirred, his voice hoarse. Cassandra, you cannot face him now. Not like this. You are wounded. The city is crawling with his men. And Cassandra's eyes blazed as she cut him off. I cannot wait. If I give him even an hour, he will bury me alive. He will twist the truth. He will scatter lies until the world believes I was nothing but a fraud. I have only one chance. Marcus, I must strike before he can spread his poison. The car weaved through streets, slick with rain, neon flickering across the windows. Cassandra's reflection stared back at her, a queen in exile, yet crowned by fury. She remembered her father's words, whispered when she was young, in a world that fears your fire, do not dim it, burn brighter until they have no choice but to bow. She breathed, deeply clutching those words as armor against the storm ahead. When the limousine stopped before the tower, its glass doors gleaming like the mouth of a beast, Cassandra stepped out, heels clicking against the pavement, each step defiant, though her legs trembled from fatigue. The guards at the entrance shifted nervously, hands hovering over their earpieces, but she strode forward, like a queen returning to her throne, daring them to move aside, and to her shock, they did, partying in silence, their eyes following her with fear, not loyalty, but fear inside. The lobby, the air was cold, metallic and hostile. Victor had already painted her as an intruder, yet whispers rippled through the staff, some glancing at her with curiosity, some with sympathy, others with hidden smirks. She kept her head high, her every step echoing across the marble floor, until she reached the elevator, pressing the button with fingers steady, though her veins roared with adrenaline. The ride up was silent, except for the pounding of her heart, each floor passing like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the collision of destinies. When the doors opened, Cassandra stepped into a wide corridor lined with glass offices. At the end loomed the great boardroom, its double doors closed like a vault. But before she could reach it, voices rose behind her. She turned sharply to see Victor striding toward her, surrounded by two men in dark suits, his smirk sharper than knives, his eyes glinting with triumph. Cassandra, he called, his voice dripping with mockery. You just don't know when to quit, do you? But I admire the spectacle. The newspapers are already printing your fall. The courts are already reviewing your disgrace. And soon the world will see what you really are. Cassandra clutched her briefcase tighter, her voice rising like thunder. You can spread lies, Victor, but the truth will cut through every shadow you cast. I have the proof of your theft, your fraud, your betrayal, and soon The world will see who the real parasite is." Victor's laughter echoed in the sterile corridor loud, enough to draw glances from behind the glass walls. "Oh, Cassandra, always the actress, always the dramatic queen with fire in her eyes. But tell me, what good is proof if no one believes it? What good are papers when the world prefers a scandalous lie to a complicated truth?" He stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his breath cold, his words cruel. "I will erase you, Cassandra. I will not just take your hotel. I will take your name, your legacy, your dignity, until history forgets you ever existed." Cassandra felt the weight of his threat pressing against her like chains, yet chains had never held her eyes locked onto his with a fury that burned away the fear. "You made one mistake, Victor. You forgot that I do not need permission to exist, and I do not beg to be remembered. I carve my name into stone with fire, and when the ashes of your empire scatter, mine will still remain." Before Victor could respond, Cassandra pulled open the briefcase, slamming the documents against his chest, the pages scattering through the air like falling daggers. The corridor froze, staff peering from offices, eyes wide as they glimpsed the papers. Bank records, contracts, signatures. The whispers began to ripple louder like cracks in glass. Cassandra's voice thundered across the walls. "You see this? You see the thief who stole from you, who built lies upon your backs. You see the man who dares call himself leader but who rots from within. Look at him, look at the proof before your eyes." Victor's face twisted with rage. His men lunged forward, but Cassandra did not flinch. She stood tall as the whispers grew louder, some staff recording on their phones, others murmuring to each other. The air shifted, the illusion Victor had built around himself beginning to fracture. He grabbed her wrist, hissing between clenched teeth. "You think this will save you? You think you can shame me in front of my own people?" Cassandra leaned closer, her voice a blade cutting through his fury. "I do not think, Victor. I know, because truth has a way of bleeding through every lie you spread, and you cannot stop it." The guards rushed in, pulling Cassandra back, yet even as they dragged her away, she held her head high, her voice echoing through the halls. "Let the world decide. Let them choose between lies and truth, between greed and justice." The staff's eyes followed her, some with fear, some with awe, but the seed had been planted, and Cassandra knew seeds had a way of growing even in poisoned soil. Thrown once more into the rain outside, Cassandra staggered but caught herself, her heels digging into the pavement, her chest heaving. She had faced him directly, and though he had tried to cage her words, the truth had already escaped into the air like wildfire, and fire was hard to contain. She climbed back into the limousine, Marcus gripping her arm, his eyes wide with both fear and respect. "What did you do, Cassandra?" His voice cracked, and she answered with steady fire. "I showed them who he is now. The world will finish the rest." As the limousine pulled away, Cassandra's phone buzzed, messages pouring in, reporters calling, activists reaching out, allies she never knew she had emerging from the shadows. The proof she had spilled like stormwater in that tower was already leaking into the veins of the city. Yet Cassandra knew this was not the end. Victor would not surrender quietly. He would come for her harder than ever before. He would strike at her not through business, but through her blood, through her past, through the wounds she had hidden deep inside. Her reflection in the window looked back at her eyes, hollow yet blazing, her lips whispering words meant only for herself. "He thinks he has broken me, but I have only begun to rise." And the rain outside answered her with the rhythm of war drums. The night was heavy with thunder, as if the sky itself carried the weight of everything Cassandra had endured. Rain slashed against the windows of the safe house where she stood alone, staring at the city skyline, her heart a storm of fury and resolve. The documents had been spread, the proof had begun to ripple across news stations and social feeds, yet Victor was not a man who yielded. He was a man who struck back harder each time, and Cassandra knew this night would decide everything. Her phone buzzed again, messages exploding one after another, allies confirming rallies outside the tower, reporters begging for statements, staff resigning en masse from Victor's side. Yet in the middle of it all, a message froze her blood, a photo of her mother's house, her childhood home, flames curling from the roof. The message beneath, short and cruel: "This is what happens when you challenge me." Cassandra dropped the phone, her breath sharp, her knees buckling for just a heartbeat, grief surging through her like poison. But she did not collapse. She rose taller than the storm, because Victor had given her not just pain, but the weapon of righteous fire. Marcus appeared behind her, his wounds still bandaged, but his eyes blazing. "He has gone too far, Cassandra. He is burning everything to ashes." She turned to him, and her voice carried the weight of destiny. "Then We burn him before he burns the world." Together, they left the safe house, the car speeding through streets, alive with chaos. Protesters shouting outside the tower, police lights flickering, journalists swarming, yet through the chaos Cassandra walked like a queen forged in fire, her heels clattering against the wet pavement, her hair whipping in the wind, her eyes locked on the tower where Victor waited. She could feel his presence like a snake coiled in the dark inside. The tower, the boardroom, was a battlefield. Victor stood at the head of the long table, his suit pristine, his smile poisonous. Around him sat board members, some fearful, some eager to watch. Blood spill cameras lined the walls, broadcasting live too. The world. Victor spread his arms wide, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we settle the farce once and for all. Cassandra Monroe has returned to challenge me, but I stand before you as the rightful owner of this empire. She is nothing but a liar, a thief, a pretender." Cassandra stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. "You call me a pretender, Victor, yet you stand draped in wealth, stolen from the hands of those who built it. You call me a liar, yet your empire is founded on lies. You have poisoned the city with greed, but tonight the poison ends." The room erupted, voices shouting, cameras flashing. Victor sneering, "You have nothing, Cassandra. Your so-called proof is noise. Your allies are shadows. Your fire is nothing but a candle, and I will snuff it out with one breath." Cassandra moved to the center of the room, lifting her phone high, streaming live. As millions watched across the world, she spoke not to Victor, but to every screen glowing in the night. "You wanted to see the truth? Then watch." One by one she displayed the records, the contracts, the testimonies, faces of former staff who had escaped his grip, voices of those he had silenced for years. The truth pouring out unstoppable like floodwaters, and as the evidence grew, the board members shifted uneasily, whispers cutting through the room like knives. Victor's face twisted, fury breaking through his polished mask. He lunged across the table, grabbing her wrist, his voice hissing, "I will kill you before I let you take this from me." Gasps echoed the cameras, catching everything, security rushing forward, but Cassandra did not flinch. She stared into his eyes and whispered words only he could hear. "You already lost the moment you showed them who you truly are," Victor roared, shoving her back. But the crowd had turned, shouts rising, reporters swarming, police storming through the doors, chaos breaking open like a dam. Victor fought, screaming that he was the victim, but the world had already chosen. The world had already seen as officers dragged him away. Cassandra stood, shaking her breath, ragged tears burning at the corners of her eyes, not of weakness, but of release. The tower that had once cast her out now echoed with the sound of justice. She lifted her head to the cameras, her voice steady. "Sometimes you must lose everything before you find who you really are. Sometimes the fire that tries to destroy you becomes the fire that sets you free." The next morning, the city was different. The hotel that had been her prison and her crown now stood open again, its staff returning, not under chains of fear, but under banners of hope. Cassandra walked through the lobby, sunlight spilling across marble floors, her footsteps echoing not with rage but with peace. Marcus at her side, the staff gathered around, their voices rising in applause, their faces shining with loyalty born not from fear but from truth. She had reclaimed not just the building but the spirit that had always belonged to her. In her office, she sat by the window staring out at the skyline. The storm finally passed the city, breathing a little lighter. She touched the desk her father had once leaned on and whispered softly, as if to him, "It is done. The scars remain, but they are proof that I survived." The news spread like fire. Victor sentenced, stripped of power, his empire dissolved. Cassandra praised, not just as a CEO, but as a survivor, fighter, a woman who turned betrayal into a weapon and pain into strength. The world that had once doubted her now looked upon her with awe. Yet Cassandra did not chase their applause. She carried only the quiet knowledge that she had walked through fire and come out whole. That night, as she stood on the rooftop of a hotel, the city lights glowing like stars, she breathed deeply. Her heart no longer chained by grief, she whispered into the wind, for herself, for her father, for the staff, for every soul crushed by greed. We rise. And the wind seemed to carry her words into every corner of the city. The story of Cassandra Monroe was not just one of revenge, it was a story of rebirth, a story of how even when you are thrown out of your own home, stripped of your name and dragged through the ashes, you can still rise fiercer than ever and carve your truth into the world. And though Victor had tried to erase her history, she had written a new one with fire, with courage, with unbreakable will. And as the city below pulsed with life, the hotel glowing like a beacon, Cassandra smiled not with triumph, but with peace, the kind of peace that comes when the battle is done, and the scars no longer ache but remind you of the strength you always carried. The end.